Welcome back here, guys, to the Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on talking about the Cowboys, right? Each and every week, they never fail to provide something that we have to talk about. Well, I shouldn't say they too much more than it is just their owner, Jerry Jones, their owner and their GM, Jerry Jones, because it's honestly hard to try and hurt your team as much as the Dallas Cowboys do with what their owner and their general manager says, because it seems like every week there's something said by Jerry, done by Jerry that it's just like did he really say that? Like is he being serious? It feels like he is, just because there's so much just I think just convincing tone in his voice that he really believes everything that he says, but it hasn't been completely, I guess, just reasonable, I guess you would say, until this point in the year. And Jerry Jones, to that point, dropped another gem for us this week on the Cowboys flagship radio station, this time clearly blaming the offense's woes on the play calling so far. And just to show you guys what he said exactly, I'll show it to you guys here. This is what he said this past Tuesday on their radio station. He said, "We're designing bad plays, or we're designing bad concepts. The facts are that there's some of that, but there's also some execution. There's some of the talent. I like our talent. I really do like our talent." And, the first part is really what we're trying to focus in on. We're designing bad plays, or we're designing bad concepts. Who calls the offense? Who's in charge of designing these bad plays, these bad concepts? That would be their head coach, Mike McCarthy. He is responsible for the play calling. He has the play calling duties on the offensive side of the ball. And already it doesn't sound great to basically call out your head coach, your own head coach, obviously, publicly in the radio interview that he does each and every week. And it got to Mike McCarthy. He didn't hear it directly, but of course the media members for the head coach's press conference had to bring it up. And this is what Mike McCarthy had to say about those comments made by Jerry Jones, essentially about him. He said, "I talk to Jerry all the time. We have time to go through self-scout, so I didn't see the comments specifically. I don't think we have bad concepts and bad plays. I'll go back and check." And he kind of laughed it off, kind of ironically, pretty awkward too. Just very nervous, like your own boss is telling you you're doing a bad job without directly telling you, and publicly at that. Basically what Jerry Jones did say in that sentiment, what he basically said to everyone to know, he said that he's doing his job, as the general manager. He did his job to find all this talent, to find all these great players, but only, if only we had the right plays, the right concepts. If only those plays and concepts were better, and maybe we'd do better as an offense. That's basically how I took it, and how I'm sure a lot of people took it, just from reading those quotes and reading his sentiment this past week on the radio station. And to me, the main problem with this, to me, and just how, you can't make this stuff up with what Jerry Jones is saying, because he's not only criticizing his head coach, his own head coach. He's publicly saying that the concepts, the bad play designs are not up to par. And I get trying to hold everybody accountable. The players maybe not playing great. He mentioned the talent, how it could be that. The play calling and things like this. I'm sure he's mentioned other things in the past. But in the same breath, with this being your own head coach, again, this is another scenario where the Cowboys, just members of the Cowboys organization, really Jerry, just says too much publicly. You don't really need to say that you think it's the bad play designs and the bad concepts, because people clearly interpret that as, who's calling these plays? Oh, it's the head coach. All right, well, you're basically blaming him for the offense, right? Especially with the fact that he says that it is some of the talent, but again, he reiterates towards the end, I like our talent. I really do like our talent. And he said it all off season and all season, right? He was very confident in the players that he had. He was very confident in the young players that they have as well. But, you get beat up so many times at home. You can't stop the run. You can't run the ball. But still to back your team up like this, again, I get it. Teams, owners, general managers, head coaches, they all back their teams despite of how bad it looks. But you can't do that in the same breath as blaming essentially your offensive play caller for the designs and everything like that. It kind of goes hand in hand, right? You can't just have one and think that the other one is flawless, right? So that's one thing. Also, if we are going to blame the head coach, to blame him is, well, one thing is the fact that Mike McCarthy has won a Super Bowl a lot more recent than this entire organization has. So that's one thing to criticize that guy out of everybody else that you could have mentioned seems a bit off. And also, Jerry Jones hired Mike McCarthy, obviously, and the biggest thing to me is that last season, towards the end of it, right, where the Packers beat the Cowboys, it was the perfect opportunity to send a message if you were Jerry Jones and say, you know what, the coach, the standard has not been up to par. Someone has to assume the consequences, obviously, of this. So I felt that it was probably appropriate to find a new head coach, right? Because the same thing had been happening. You were getting the same results. You were great in the regular season, but now the playoffs, again, you fall short in the playoffs. So I thought this was a great chance to go out and find a new head coach, especially with Mike McCarthy going to be on the last year of his deal. But right away, Jerry Jones said that he was going to keep Mike and that they were confident in him as the head coach going forward pretty quickly after this loss. So if you were going to take that stance a few months ago and be pretty confident in Mike McCarthy that he was going to be your guy and that you were thinking that this was just going to be the exact same thing the following year, the year that we're in right now, as lame duck scenarios goes, which this is exactly what that is. Mike McCarthy now on the last year of his deal on another team that's severely underperforming, he is serving that role, the scapegoat, the easy excuse to use on the head coach that you're probably not going to re-sign. You just kept him around, and now if there's anybody to blame, it's that guy that you're probably just going to move on from after this season, especially if they're not performing up to standard, right? Even if they made it to the playoffs, they probably weren't going to go that far, and Mike McCarthy probably wasn't going to be resigned. So now during the season, when you're playing worse off than a lot of people say that you are, well, who's an easy excuse to go to? The head coach that is probably going to be gone anyway. It makes no sense to me. The confidence that you had in Mike McCarthy just in January, basically, to come back now and to be 3-3. Luckily, you're 3-3 at that, and you think that the head coach is the problem, right? You think the play calling now is the problem, and if you thought that was the problem, you probably shouldn't have re-signed him, or you probably shouldn't have kept him around. You probably should have fired him if now you're just going to do a 180-degree turn and just basically blame him for the offenses, right? And not only it's an insane scenario to think of, because I'm sure Mike McCarthy is the only head coach that has to worry about his own owner, his own general manager, publicly blaming him for, the offensive woes, or at least a good part of it as well. And not only is this just kind of ridiculous for how an owner and head coach relationship should go, could you imagine being Mike McCarthy right now, having to answer these questions, but also trying to install a game plan this week for the 49ers game that is super important to this season, right, for the Cowboys, as equally it is for the 49ers. Can you imagine trying to come up with a game plan, trying to install it, and trying to convince the players that this is what we're going to do this week, all at the same time while your owner is going on the public radio and saying that these play calls, these designs that your head coach is trying to sell you essentially are not, up to par, or what's wrong with the offense, right? How is any player going to look at that and say, well, if the owner thinks it's bad, why are we going to, be fully motivated or fully invested in thinking that this game plan is going to work, right? When you have two sides of the argument there, the players, it's no surprise that when they go out there, it looks like they're really not believing in what they're doing, or they don't really know what they're doing, because the owner's saying one thing, degrading the offensive play calling, and the coach is trying to sell you on it. it makes no sense to try and do it that way. There's nobody's on the same page essentially at that point. And also, to apply 1 point in favor of Jerry Jones, though, with a head coach, with Mike McCarthy, is the 1 point I'll say sort of in favor of Jerry, is we have heard that Dak and even Mike McCarthy as well have said that the practices haven't been up to par. And for that point, I will agree that Mike McCarthy has to do a better job at that. That's one thing that, the head coach, through 7 weeks and the practices aren't being taken seriously, that's on the head coach, right? That can't happen. But, it just goes back to McCarthy trying to sell this game plan and Jerry Jones essentially undercutting it. Because, again, it's no surprise to anybody that these players are not buying into it or trying or taking the practice seriously if the owner is saying that these designs, these concepts don't really work, and still the head coach is trying to install it, again, going into a big game against the 49ers. And not only that, but just having to answer these questions. He shouldn't have to answer these questions, right? Nobody else has to worry about their owner publicly calling them out like this. You get into this press conference thinking you're going to answer questions about the 49ers, and right away they ask you, oh, have you heard what your own owner said about you? Essentially criticizing you. And it's just a distraction, basically. It feels like no one's thinking about football at this point in time. And, don't even get me started on what Jerry Jones said about, Derrick Henry and how that was pretty ridiculous what he said. But, I understand that Jerry has to go on these shows each and every week and talk to the media each and every week, but I don't think I've ever seen a situation where an owner or a general manager has seemed so rattled about anything that comes his way. Bringing up Derrick Henry just on his own where the question wasn't even asked, or last week threatening a guy's job for, holding him accountable for this roster not being up to par. I've never seen someone so shaken and rattled from a situation that he got himself in with this team. And again, I found it pretty weird that if he came out and said that, you know what, like, this is my bad, I really messed up here, I think a lot of people would applaud him for doing that and being the bigger person. But just continuing to kind of dance around the blame and not assuming responsibility just makes the situation worse. And I don't know how these players are supposed to focus on just football and winning these games with all this other noise surrounding them. But we'll see how they come out on Sunday. The 49ers aren't looking too hot, but I'm thinking the 49ers should win that game just based on the fact that they don't have to worry about other stuff like this. So, yeah, maybe next week we'll get some more stuff from Jerry and see what he says next week, depending on how the game goes. So that is all he had to say on that topic. Very interesting still that he actually said it. But from one owner, we go to another one in New York. The same division, this time owner John Mara for the New York Giants expressed his level of confidence in Brian Daboll, their head coach, and their general manager Joe Schoen for the rest of the season and potentially beyond this season as well. With a lot of pressure seemingly on both of them, John Mara has given his vote of confidence to both of them, and maybe not so much Daniel Jones. So we're going to get more into that on what he said about Daboll, Joe Schoen, and what he didn't say about Daniel Jones in just a couple of seconds. We'll be right back.